Laura, this is not a jury trial. The judge will make the ultimate decision. Has he shown any signs during the course of the testimony about which way he could rule?
Well, he certainly showed his hand when he ruled for a summary judgment, which is essentially a way of saying, look, I'm going to resolve one of the biggest parts of this case before this part of the trial even begins. And that's whether the documents themselves were fraudulent. Having done that, now the attention is turned to essentially how expensive this might be or whatever penalty might ensue based on how the information was used or intended to be used. And so certainly that is a show of hand, but he certainly seems to be very, very clear that he is not going to tolerate consistent or even sporadic attacks against members of his staff, including a clerk. And he is showing a very, very concerted effort to ensure that they know that he means business when it comes to focusing on this particular case, this particular matter, and not trying to use the courtroom as some sort of a circus tent.
Interesting. Norma, Eric Trump clearly grew frustrated with the prosecutor's questions earlier today. We know emotional testimony can impact a jury, but what about a judge? This is not a jury trial.
Well, in this case, the judge will make a credibility decision, Wolf. He's going to decide whether he believes Eric Trump, Don Jr., and the other members of the Trump family. And Eric grew flustered today because he was confronted over and over again with evidence, emails, and other proof where he claimed he was not involved, and then they showed him that he was involved. And so the judge may very well read that as a token of dishonesty. That happened with Don Jr., it happened more strongly with Eric. And I think we're likely to see a finding of low credibility that will be very hard to attack on appeal. That's one of the toughest things because it's based on the judge's eyewitness observation.
Laura, when former President Trump takes the stand, and we expect he will take the stand sometime next week, can he plead the fifth for every question, or will he be required to answer some questions?
Well, here's the risk of pleading the fifth. And by the way, taking a step back, how extraordinary to think that you'd hear from a former president of the United States taking the stand in a civil fraud trial in his hometown of New York for a quarter of, I think, $1 billion as a potential liability and fine. His adult children, at least several of them, already testifying, and Ivanka appealing this process to see whether she ultimately has to testify. It's very extraordinary to think about that, just taking a step back. But if he does testify, here's a risk in a civil trial as opposed to a criminal context. If this were a criminal prosecution, Wolf, him saying that he was pleading the fifth could not be used against him. It'd be one's right to be able to do so. In a civil context, you can do what's called draw an adverse inference based on that assertion of the fifth. What does that mean? It means that I can essentially assume as the fact finder or the judge or jury, the judge in this case, of course, that why you're not answering the question or what you would ultimately say if you were forced to answer that question is not going to be good for you. And so it creates a really important rock and a hard place conversation for any litigant or any defendant to take that stand.